Judith Butler's The Psychic Life of Power aims to integrate psychoanalytic and Foucauldian theory, particularly focusing on the absence of a theory of the psyche in Foucault's work. According to Butler, Foucault's rejection of the concept of the psyche is intentional because he views the formation of human subjects as psyches as a product of power. In other words, power and the psyche are interconnected and cannot be conceptually separated. By questioning the relationship between power and the psyche, Butler challenges the notion that power simply happens to individuals. Instead, she argues that psychic mechanisms are power formations, and power operates through the constitution of psychic modalities. This perspective recognizes that the organization of human subjects as psyches is entangled with power, while still acknowledging the reality of individual psychic experiences. Butler also engages with Louis Althusser's theory of interpellation, which describes how subjects are formed through social hailing. Althusser uses the example of a policeman calling out, "Hey you," and most individuals instinctively respond by turning around, thereby recognizing and accepting their subjecthood. However, Butler questions the attribution of absolute power to ideology in this process. She suggests that individuals must already have a desire or readiness to respond to the hailing, and power's dependency on the subject's quick response renders it less sovereign than Althusser suggests. By emphasizing the subject's agency and desire in the process of interpellation, Butler challenges the idea of power as an external force that passively shapes individuals. She argues that models of power should not overlook the ways in which subjects are already constituted and predisposed to respond to ideological hailing. Moreover, Butler explores how theories of guilt, desire, and conscience undermine accounts of interpellation that portray subjects as obedient to power. Butler aims to avoid positing a subject, desire, consent, or will as being outside of power in her understanding of the subject who turns to ideology. According to Butler, the subject's attachment to subjection is itself a retroactive effect or play of power. In her readings of Freud and Nietzsche, she argues that interpellation, the process by which individuals are hailed and recognized as subjects, relies on conscience, specifically guilty conscience. However, Butler contends that attachments to power, including desire, conscience, guilt, or the will to turn, are also formations of power, and can be some of the most insidious formations. When discussing the primordial subject and its earliest attachments to others, society, or the world, Butler suggests that these formations of guilt, conscience, melancholia, and object attachment can also be theorized as the play of power. By doing so, she avoids positing a subject that exists outside of and precedes power. While Foucault primarily describes the modern constitution of an introspective and self-regulating subject, Butler questions whether the psychoanalytic concepts of primordial psychic divisions, such as distinctions between interior-exterior, can be understood as power formations. Butler extends the synthesis of Freud and Foucault by speculatively considering whether the primordial attachment to a self-image, as seen in the mirror phase, could also be understood as a power formation. This raises questions about what constitutes an investment and its constituting power. In psychoanalysis, we may sometimes conceive of an interior ego that desires an exterior object. However, psychoanalysis theorizes that it is the very formation of desire that institutes the subject as the ego, which lacks and turns to the desired object, that would make it complete. This retrospective installation enables the psychic structure of identificatory object attachment and the formation of the superegoic conscience. Moreover, according to a non-linear psychoanalytic theory, Each psychic development is understood as reconfiguring the subject's psychic structures. This implies that there will always have been an attachment to the authority that recognizes and judges us on a psychic level. Such theoretical models avoid explaining the primordial ego as subsequently undergoing subjection to authority. Instead, the ego is already formed by power, through object attachment, desire, identification with, and subjection to the other, as synthesized with a model of psychoanalytic retrospective psychic formation. The ego function, which invests in authority, is also the original function that invests in the object as lost. Power formations can be located in the very incitement to invest in the world, the other, critical agency, and social authority. Butler's aim is to strike a delicate balance in her theorization of power, neither positing power as all-encompassing, nor considering the subject or resistance as exterior or prior to power. By synthesizing psychoanalysis and Foucault, she develops a theory where nothing is considered prior to power, including attachment, desire, will, assent, turning, or conscience, which she uses to challenge Althusserian formulations of interpellation. Crucially, Butler argues that one's will, desire, or attachment simultaneously constitutes both the excess and the fragility of that which one is attached to. In other words, the very will, desire, or attachment that power requires also holds the potential for resistance and constitutes a constitutive failure of power. Butler displaces Freud and Foucault with a theory of constitutive repetition, drawing on her earlier work in books like Excitable Speech and Gender Trouble. According to this perspective, power formations are also sites of unpredictability, deformations, perversions, surprises, and dislodgements. Unpredictability resides in the small differentials of our identifications, attachments, appropriation of norms, incitements, and the differential formations of our nostalgia for lost objects and relinquished objects of desire. These unpredictable repetitions are not outside of power, but are part of power's reproduction. However, they are not stable or predictable, and they represent moments when power is less efficacious and less predictable. This understanding challenges the notion of power as an all-encompassing, divine-like, or predictable monolith. For Foucault, the subject produced through subjection is not produced instantaneously in its totality. Instead, it is continuously and repeatedly produced, without being completely renewed each time. The possibility of repetition that does not consolidate the dissociated unity of the subject undermines the force of normalization. Power formations are constantly reworked in their very repetition, highlighting a fragility inherent to power, rather than a form of resistance external to it. Power, therefore, is everywhere, including in the psychic formation of object attachment, but it is also fragile and not an all-encompassing, predictable entity.